More than 900 years ago, beside the Mississippi River, a city larger than many European capitals rose from the floodplain. Tens of thousands of people lived beneath towering earthen monuments, gathered in enormous plazas, and built a society whose power reached across North America. Then Cahokia began to empty. Its houses disappeared, its ceremonies faded, and its people moved away, leaving behind a mystery that archaeology is still trying to explain. Before we uncover the rise and fall of this forgotten American metropolis, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you enjoy ancient history, lost civilizations, and mysteries buried beneath the earth. Long before the first great mound rises above the plain, the land is already moving. The Mississippi does not pass quietly through this part of North America. It bends, splits, overflows, abandons old channels, and cuts new ones through a broad, low basin east of the river. Water gathers in back swamps and shallow lakes. Seasonal floods spread dark silt over the ground. Forests rise on slightly higher ridges, while reeds and grasses cover the wetter hollows. In spring, the landscape can seem half river and half land, uncertain in its boundaries beneath a wide sky. This is the American Bottom, a floodplain stretching for many miles along the Mississippi opposite what is now St. Louis, and more than 1,000 years ago it becomes the setting for one of the largest cities ever built north of Mexico. At first glance, it does not look like a place for a city. Floodwater can erase trails, drown crops, and isolate settlements. Mosquitoes swarm over stagnant pools. Heat settles over the lowlands in summer, while winter winds sweep across the open plain. Yet the same forces that make the region dangerous also make it unusually rich. Floods renew the soil. Rivers and lakes provide fish, turtles, mussels, waterfowl, and easy travel. Nearby uplands offer deer, nuts, timber, stone, and refuge above the wet ground. The plain is not empty wilderness, but a mosaic of environments. A family living here can plant, hunt, gather, and travel by canoe through a natural network of waterways. The landscape demands attention, but it rewards those who learn its rhythm. That rhythm matters because Cahokia does not emerge from nowhere. Its foundations are ecological before they are political. The future city will depend on food surpluses, and those surpluses begin in the floodplain's deep soils. Maize eventually becomes central, but it's only one part of a broader food system that includes squash, sunflower, goosefoot, maygrass, and other native plants cultivated for generations. Fishing and hunting remain important. Archaeological evidence suggests that people here use several habitats at once, rather than relying entirely on a single crop. That flexibility encourages growth, but it does not make anyone invulnerable. A river that feeds a population can also destroy its fields. From the beginning, Cahokia's story is tied to abundance and instability at the same time. The Mississippi is the great presence behind everything. It is a road, a barrier, a source of food, and a force beyond human control. Canoes can move people and goods across immense distances along its connected river system. Routes lead north toward the upper Mississippi and Great Lakes, south toward the lower valley, west along the Missouri, and east through the Ohio. Cahokia stands near one of the continent's most important natural crossroads, even before anyone imagines a city there. Yet geography alone does not explain what follows. Many communities live beside rivers without building monumental centers. What makes this floodplain different is the way landscape, population, farming, ritual, and authority eventually become concentrated in one place. The plain offers room for large fields and broad public spaces. Natural ridges provide slightly elevated ground for settlement. Clay and earth are available for construction, while nearby forests supply timber for houses, walls, and ceremonial posts. Almost every material needed to build a city can be found within reach, but materials do not organize themselves. At some point, people begin to reshape the land deliberately, turning natural advantage into planned human order. Before that transformation, the American Bottom is already filled with memory. Generations live, farm, bury their dead, and shift their settlements across the floodplain. Old village sites, paths, fields, and sacred places accumulate beneath later construction. Cahokia is often described as if it suddenly appears on empty ground, but what survives in the record suggests a much longer history of occupation. The evidence remains incomplete because wood decays, rivers shift, and later farming disturbs ancient deposits. Still, post holes, pottery fragments, hearths, food remains, and burial sites reveal that communities are firmly established before Cahokia reaches its height. There is another feature of the landscape that is easy to miss today: visibility. The floodplain is broad and relatively flat. A mound raised above it can be seen from far away. The builders of Cahokia eventually exploit this openness. Monumental earthworks do more than elevate buildings. They make authority visible across distance. They turn the flatness of the plain into a stage. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy. The mystery begins with a contradiction. This floodplain is fertile enough to support thousands, connected enough to draw people from afar, and spacious enough for monumental construction. Yet it is also exposed to flood, disease, crop failure, and environmental change. The same landscape that allows Cahokia to grow may later limit how long such growth can continue. Scholars still debate how often severe floods affected the city, how much ecological pressure its population created, and whether environmental problems played a decisive role in its decline. No single explanation fully accounts for what happened, but even at the beginning the tension is present. Cahokia will be built not in spite of the river's uncertainty, but within it. Imagine the plain before the city. Canoes move through narrow channels between stands of willow. Small settlements sit on natural rises above damp ground. Fields open near houses roofed with grass. Smoke hangs in the morning air. Beyond the villages, forests edge the basin, and the Mississippi rolls past with the slow authority of something older than any human plan. Nothing yet announces that this place will become a metropolis. There are no giant platform mounds, no vast central plaza, no towering palisades, but the ingredients are gathering productive soil, navigable water, established communities, expanding agriculture, and a position at the center of a continent-sized network. Every flood leaves another layer, every abandoned channel redraws the map, every generation learns where the ground remains dry, where crops grow best, and where people can assemble. Then, around the turn of the 11th century, the scale of human ambition changes. People gather, settlements shift, earth begins to rise in shapes no river has made. The city is not there yet, but the ground beneath it is ready. For centuries before that change, the people of the American bottom live in communities that are neither isolated nor simple. Their villages may appear small when measured against the city that will follow, but they belong to a wide indigenous world of exchange, ceremony, farming, kinship, and movement. Families build houses from wooden posts, woven reeds, grass, and clay. They clear gardens near their homes, hunt in the surrounding forests, gather nuts and fruits, and travel by river to visit relatives or trade with distant settlements. The landscape is already socially connected long before it becomes urban. Archaeologists often describe these earlier communities as part of the late woodland period, though the label can flatten a world that changes across time and place. There is no single uniform culture stretching across eastern Northern America. Different peoples speak different languages, maintain distinct traditions, and organize their settlements in different ways. Yet many communities share certain practices: mound building, seasonal gatherings, decorated pottery, communal ceremonies, and the careful cultivation of native plants. These traditions do not disappear when Cahokia rises. They become part of the foundation from which its new order is created. The mound itself is not a Cahokian invention. Indigenous peoples have been shaping earth into monuments in North America for thousands of years. Some earlier mounds contain burials, others mark ceremonial places or anchor communities within the landscape. What changes at Cahokia is scale, concentration, and purpose. Later builders will transform mound construction into an enormous public enterprise. But the knowledge behind that work already exists. People understand how different soils behave, how baskets of earth can be layered, and how raised spaces can separate the sacred, the political, and the everyday. The same is true of agriculture. The region's inhabitants do not suddenly discover farming when maize becomes important. Long before maize dominates their fields, they cultivate what archaeologists sometimes call the Eastern Agricultural Complex. Sunflowers provide oily seeds. goosefoot produces nutritious grain-like seeds. Sumpweed, maygrass, and knotweed add variety to the diet. Squash offers food and useful containers. These plants are tended, selected, and changed through generations of human care. Some varieties become so dependent on cultivation that they differ clearly from their wild ancestors. This older agricultural system is one of Cahokia's less visible foundations. It reflects accumulated knowledge when to plant on floodplain soils, how to store seeds through winter, which low ridges remain above seasonal water, and how to combine cultivated foods with fish, game, shellfish, and wild plants. The people who eventually gather at Cahokia inherit centuries of experimentation. They are not beginning from ignorance. They are bringing mature farming traditions into a new and more demanding social world. Maize, however, changes the possibilities. Originally domesticated far to the south in Mexico, maize spreads gradually across the continent. It appears in parts of eastern North America long before Cahokia, but its early presence does not mean that it immediately becomes a staple. For generations, it may remain a minor crop, a special food, or one element among many. Only later does its cultivation expand dramatically in the Mississippi Valley. By the centuries before Cahokia's rise, maize becomes increasingly important, offering high yields and the possibility of feeding larger, more concentrated populations. But maize is not an effortless gift. It requires labour. Fields must be cleared and maintained, seeds must be planted at the right time, harvest must be dried, processed, protected from animals, and stored. Dependence on maize can also create nutritional problems when diets are too narrow. Archaeological evidence from human remains sometimes reveals signs of iron deficiency, infection, and physical stress in maize-dependent societies. Scholars still debate exactly how quickly maize transformed life in the American bottom, but the broad pattern is clear as maize production expands. Village organization and population begin to change. The crop also changes time. Hunting and gathering follow many seasonal rhythms, but intensive maize farming places particular pressure on planting and harvest. Large fields require coordinated work. Food storage creates new questions about ownership, distribution, obligation, and authority. A successful harvest can support ceremonies, visitors, specialists, and leaders who do not spend every day producing their own food. A failed harvest can deepen inequality and tension. Maize does not create Cahokia by itself, but it makes Cahokia's scale more achievable. Villages in the American bottom grow and shift. Some settlements contain clusters of households arranged around open spaces. Others appear more dispersed. People move when houses decay, soils are exhausted, relatives divide, or political relationships change. These movements are normal. A village built largely from wood and thatch does not need to remain fixed for centuries. Homes are abandoned, rebuilt nearby, and eventually reduced to stains in the earth visible only to archaeologists. Those stains reveal a great deal. The size and shape of post holes show where walls once stood. Storage pits contain charred seeds and broken tools. Pottery styles reveal connections between communities and changes in identity. Animal bones show what people ate and which environments they used. Even burned fragments of plants can preserve the rhythm of a household maize kernels, nutshells, seeds, and firewood gathered from nearby forests. What they cannot fully preserve is the meaning people give these things. A decorated pot may mark family identity, ritual use, social status, or simply the preference of its maker. A settlement's arrangement may reflect kinship, ceremony, defense, or practical responses to wet ground. The evidence remains incomplete, and no excavation can recover every story once told around a hearth. Still, a pattern emerges. In the centuries before Cahokia's expansion, the region becomes more densely occupied. Agricultural production increases. Communities participate in wider exchange networks. Ceremonial traditions connect people across distances, while local identities remain strong. Some settlements gain influence over others, though the nature of leadership is uncertain. Authority may belong to respected elders, ritual specialists, successful household heads, or emerging hereditary elites. What survives in the record suggests that social differences are becoming more visible, but not yet on the scale later seen at Cahokia. Then the old pattern begins to strain. Small communities remain rooted in family and place, yet a larger centre starts to pull people toward it. New ideas about ceremony, leadership, and collective identity circulate through the floodplain. Maize fields spread across productive ground, public gatherings grow in size. Existing villages do not simply expand naturally into a city. Instead, many are reorganized, relocated, or absorbed into something more ambitious. The people who will build Cahokia are already here, but others will come from far beyond the floodplain. They carry different pottery traditions, different memories, and perhaps different languages. Somehow, these communities are drawn into a shared project powerful enough to reshape the land. The quiet world before the city is coming to an end. The transformation does not unfold slowly enough to be mistaken for ordinary growth. Around the middle of the 11th century, the American bottom changes with astonishing speed. Villages are abandoned or rearranged. New neighborhoods appear. Monumental construction begins on a scale that requires thousands of people to move earth, cut timber, prepare food, and coordinate labor. Within a relatively short span, the place that becomes Cahokia is no longer one settlement among many. It becomes the dominant center of the region. Archaeologists sometimes describe this moment as a kind of Big Bang, not because the city appears in a single day, but because so many changes cluster around the same period. Population rises sharply, public spaces are redesigned, large mounds take form, new pottery styles spread, houses multiply across the floodplain, ritual life intensifies, the city draws people inward, and the surrounding countryside is reorganized around it. Around the year 1050, Cahokia enters what archaeologists call the Mississippian period, though the label is only a framework. What is visible in the ground is a rupture in scale. Earlier communities may have gathered seasonally for ceremonies or exchange, but Cahokia becomes something more permanent and demanding. It requires continuous food production, regular construction, political coordination, and a social order capable of holding together people who may not share the same ancestry. No surviving written record explains who initiated this transformation. There is no royal inscription naming a founder and no chronicle describing a conquest. What survives in the record suggests deliberate planning, but the planners remain invisible. They may have been hereditary leaders, ritual authorities, coalition builders, or members of powerful households. Scholars still debate whether Cahokia's rise was driven mainly by religion, politics, economic opportunity, population movement, or some combination of all four. The most striking possibility is that ceremony came first, a major religious event, a new sacred movement, or a reorganization of ritual authority may have drawn people toward the center. Cahokia's early expansion coincides with sweeping changes in layout and symbolism, as if the city is being made to embody a new vision of the world. Plazas are cleared, mounds are positioned with care, important buildings rise on elevated platforms, public space becomes formalized. Such construction would have been impossible without collective belief. Moving millions of baskets of soil is hard labor. It takes time away from farming, hunting, fishing, tool-making, and household work. People do not build on this scale unless someone can compel them, persuade them, inspire them, or bind them through obligation. Power may have rested partly in force, but force alone cannot explain the participation of so many communities over generations. Cahokia must have offered meaning as well as command. The city also appears during a period of favourable agricultural conditions. A relatively stable climate may have supported strong maize harvests, though the evidence is not precise enough to guarantee abundance every year. Productive fields around the American bottom could feed dense populations, while the river system carried goods and people from distant regions. In such conditions, Cahokia's leaders may have hosted large feasts, sponsored ceremonies, and redistributed food, strengthening their authority through generosity and spectacle. Feasting leaves traces, concentrations of animal bones, broken pottery, and food remains suggest gatherings that exceed the needs of ordinary households. These events may have marked seasonal ceremonies, mound construction, alliances, funerals, or political negotiations. A leader who can feed hundreds demonstrates access to land, labor, and networks. Yet the people arriving at Cahokia are not all from the same place. Studies of human remains, pottery, and settlement patterns indicate significant migration into the city. Some newcomers likely come from nearby villages, while others travel from much farther away. They bring different habits of cooking, house building, and pottery making. Their arrival also changes the city's social texture. This makes Cahokia's sudden expansion even more remarkable. Cities are difficult to govern when their residents share language and ancestry. Cahokia grows by incorporating people who may have arrived as strangers. Its leaders must create a broader identity powerful enough to compete with local loyalties. Monumental spaces help accomplish this. A vast plaza can gather people who live in separate neighborhoods. A towering mound can become a common reference point. Shared ceremonies can make a new political order feel ancient and sacred even when it is relatively new. The built environment begins to discipline movement. Houses are arranged in clusters. Paths lead toward public spaces. Certain zones become reserved for elites or ritual activity. The city's layout separates ordinary domestic life from monumental authority. It also places thousands of people within sight of structures that no household could have built alone. Every mound becomes evidence of collective labor and concentrated power. At its height, Greater Cahokia may have held tens of thousands of people, though estimates vary and the population was not evenly distributed. The central precinct was surrounded by neighborhoods, smaller mound centers, farmsteads, and satellite communities across the floodplain. It was not a city of stone streets and permanent apartment blocks. Much of it was built from earth, wood, thatch, and clay. Yet its density, monumental core, social hierarchy, regional influence, and dependence on organized food production place it far beyond an ordinary village. For people approaching by canoe, the change would have been visible before they reached the center. Smoke rises from hundreds of hearths. Cleared fields spread across the plain. Wooden walls and tall posts break the horizon. Earthen mounds lift buildings above surrounding houses. Crowds gather in open spaces. Drums, voices, tools, and animals fill the air. The city announces itself as a place where the human world has been rearranged. But the speed of that rearrangement carries risk. Rapid growth strains food supplies, sanitation, housing, and social trust. Migrants must be integrated. Labor must be organized. Fields must produce enough for people who are not farming every day. The same centralized authority that can mobilize thousands can also create resentment and inequality. The evidence remains incomplete, but Cahokia's explosive rise may contain the first signs of the pressures that later weaken it. For now, however, the city is ascending. Earth is carried basket by basket. Old villages give way to a new center. The floodplain is no longer merely inhabited, it is being claimed, measured, and transformed into the heart of a world. The city rises one basket at a time. There are no draft animals, iron shovels, cranes, or wheeled carts carrying soil across the American bottom. Cahokia's builders cut into the earth with tools made from wood, stone, shell, and bone. They loosen clay, sand, silt, and topsoil, load it into woven baskets or hide containers, carry it by hand, and empty it where the mound is growing. A single basket contributes almost nothing to the skyline, repeated tens of millions of times. The same movement changes the horizon. This is not random piling. The builders understand that Earth has different qualities. Some soils drain water more effectively. Others compress into dense layers or help stabilize sloping sides. Archaeological excavations reveal mounds constructed from distinct deposits, sometimes placed in carefully controlled sequences. Colored soils may have carried symbolic meaning as well as practical value. Dark earth, pale clay, yellow sand, and reddish material are brought together to create structures that are both engineered and ceremonial. The precise methods vary from mound to mound. Some are enlarged repeatedly, with new stages covering older surfaces and buildings. Others are built rapidly as part of a broader redesign. The evidence remains incomplete because erosion, farming, road construction, and earlier excavations have damaged many earthworks. Yet what survives shows that Cahokia's builders were not simply making hills. They were creating architecture from the ground itself. More than 100 mounds once stood across the greater Cahokia settlement. Most were not shaped like the rounded burial mounds familiar from other regions. Many were flat-topped platforms supporting important buildings. Some were conical, others had long ridges. Their different forms probably reflected different functions: residences, temples, council buildings, mortuary spaces, landmarks, or stages for public ceremonies. Scholars still debate the purpose of individual mounds. and their uses may have changed through time. The city's largest constructions are arranged around enormous open plazas. The Grand Plaza south of the central mound is one of the most striking examples. Before it can serve as a gathering place, parts of the natural landscape must be levelled and filled. Low areas are raised, uneven surfaces are reshaped, houses and earlier features are removed. The result is a broad, carefully maintained open space, unlike the crowded domestic neighbourhood surrounding it. Keeping such an area empty is itself a statement of power. Productive land beside a major population centre is valuable. The plaza could have held houses, gardens, storage buildings, or workshops. Instead, it remains open for public activity. Ceremonies, processions, athletic games, markets, feasts, and political gatherings may all have taken place there. The precise balance of these uses is uncertain, but the scale of the space suggests events designed to be witnessed by large crowds. From the plaza, the surrounding mounds create an organised ceremonial landscape. Elevated buildings overlook the open ground. Movement is directed through paths, gateways, and causeways. Important people can appear above the crowd, physically separated from ordinary residents. The architecture makes social difference visible without the need for written proclamations. Height becomes authority. Distance becomes status. Beyond the central precinct, Cahokia is divided into neighbourhoods. Groups of houses cluster around courtyards or smaller public spaces. Many homes are rectangular structures made from wooden posts set into the earth, with walls covered by woven material and clay. Roofs are thatched. Floors may be slightly sunken or carefully prepared. Storage pits hold food and household goods, while outdoor work areas contain hearths, tools, and refuse. These buildings require constant renewal. Wood rots in damp soil. Thatch decays. Fire can destroy an entire house. A household may rebuild in nearly the same location several times, leaving overlapping patterns of post holes beneath the surface. To archaeologists, these patterns can look like dark constellations in the soil. To Cahokia's inhabitants, they represent generations of domestic life unfolding beneath the shadow of monuments. The central city may also have been enclosed by a massive wooden palisade during parts of its history. Rows of heavy posts formed a wall around the most important precinct, interrupted by bastions or projecting sections. The palisade is rebuilt several times, requiring the cutting and transport of thousands of trees. Its purpose remains debated. It may have defended the centre from attack, controlled access to sacred spaces, displayed political strength, or performed all three functions at different moments. Its construction changes the character of Cahokia. A wall does more than keep danger out. It defines who belongs inside. It separates elite and ceremonial space from surrounding neighbourhoods. It funnels movement through controlled entrances. Even if the palisade is partly symbolic, it conveys a clear message: the city has a protected heart. Timber is everywhere. Trees become houses, walls, platforms, ladders, roof supports, ceremonial posts, and fuel. Forests near Cahokia must supply enormous quantities of wood, though scholars still debate how severe the resulting ecological pressure becomes. Some timber may have been gathered from managed woodlands or transported from farther away. The city's appetite for construction is continuous, because wooden architecture must be repaired and replaced. One lesser-known feature of Cahokia's design is the possible use of long, straight alignments connecting major structures. A raised causeway runs south from the central precinct toward another mound complex, crossing terrain that may have been wet or difficult. Such pathways could guide ceremonial processions while linking different sacred zones. They also suggest that the city was understood as a unified landscape, rather than a collection of unrelated buildings. That unity may extend beyond practical planning. Cahokia's layout appears to reflect directional order, seasonal cycles, and ideas about the structure of the cosmos. Builders align important spaces with cardinal directions, though the pattern is not perfectly rigid. The city may have represented a world divided into upper, middle, and lower realms, with mounds, plazas, water, and timber marking relationships between them. What survives in the record suggests intention, but the exact beliefs of the builders cannot be reconstructed with certainty. Still, the effect would have been unmistakable. A visitor entering Cahokia encounters a landscape in which nature and human design seem fused. Earth has become architecture, trees have become boundaries, Open ground has become a theatre for collective life. The city does not merely occupy the floodplain, it imposes a new geometry upon it. At the centre of that geometry, one mound begins to surpass all the others. Layer after layer, its broad terraces climb higher above the plain. Buildings rise on its summit, visible from miles away. The labour invested in it exceeds anything around it, and its meaning draws together religion, politics, and social rank. Cahokia has built a capital. Now it must place power at its summit. Monks Mound dominates Cahokia, not because it is merely large, but because everything around it seems arranged to acknowledge its presence. Rising in broad terraces above the floodplain, it is the greatest earthen monument at the site and one of the largest human-made earthworks in the Americas. From its summit, the central plaza spreads below like an immense cleared stage, while neighbourhoods, smaller mounds, fields, wetlands, and distant river channels extend toward the horizon. Whoever occupies this height does not simply stand above the city. They stand at the point where Cahokia's social order becomes visible. The mound takes its modern name from a small community of Trappist monks who lived nearby in the early 19th century. They did not build it, and their brief presence came many centuries after Cahokia's decline. The original name is lost. So too are the titles of the people who once lived or performed ceremonies on its summit. Archaeology can reveal the mound's dimensions, construction stages, and traces of buildings, but it cannot recover the words Cahokians used for authority, holiness, obligation, or rule. What survives is still extraordinary. Monks Mound covers more than 14 acres at its base and rises roughly 30 metres above the surrounding plain. Its broad mass is divided into several terraces rather than shaped as a simple pyramid. The front once included a large ramp or stair-like approach leading upward from the Grand Plaza. The climb itself would have created a powerful experience. A person ascending leaves the crowded level of ordinary life and moves gradually into an elevated, restricted space. The city recedes below while the structures on the summit grow larger. Excavations indicate that an enormous wooden building once stood on the upper terrace. Estimates of its size vary, but it may have been among the largest structures at Cahokia. Its function remains uncertain. It could have been the residence of a paramount leader, a council hall, a temple, or a building combining political and religious purposes that modern categories divide too neatly. In Cahokia, sacred authority and public leadership may not have existed as separate institutions. A ruler could govern because of a special relationship with ancestors, celestial powers, seasonal renewal, or the forces believed to sustain the world. The building's position matters as much as its form. From the summit, leaders could observe gatherings in the plaza and be seen by people far below. Appearances, ceremonies, and announcements performed at this height would turn political authority into spectacle. The elevation creates distance, and distance creates mystery. Most residents may rarely have approached the summit. Some may never have entered the building at all. Its very inaccessibility would strengthen its power. Monks Mound is also a record of repeated decisions. It is not built in a single uninterrupted episode. Builders enlarge and reshape it over time, adding vast quantities of earth and altering its terraces. Each new stage may correspond to a change in leadership, a major ceremony, a political crisis, or an attempt to renew the city's sacred order. The evidence remains incomplete, but the mound's growth suggests that authority at Cahokia had to be continually remade. Power was not fixed permanently in the soil. It had to be maintained through labour, ritual, and public participation. That labour itself may have been sacred. Carrying earth to a monument could serve as tribute, communal obligation, religious devotion, or a demonstration of loyalty. People from different neighbourhoods and surrounding communities may have worked together during scheduled construction events. Such gatherings would allow leaders to organise food, ceremonies, and social relationships while transforming the mound. The building process therefore strengthens the very authority the monument represents. Yet this should not be imagined only as forced labour under constant threat. Coercion may have played a role, especially in a society with visible hierarchy, but collective construction can also create belonging. People who contribute to a mound become participants in a shared world. Their baskets of earth are absorbed into a structure that may outlast their homes and their lifetimes. The monument gives physical form to relationships among households, communities, leaders, ancestors, and the landscape. The symbolism of elevation is widely important in Mississippian societies. Platform mounds often support buildings associated with elites or ceremonies. Higher realms may be connected with the sky, celestial forces, birds, order, and powerful beings, while water and the earth below may be linked with other spiritual domains. Scholars must be cautious when drawing on later indigenous traditions, because beliefs vary across peoples and change over centuries. Still, comparison suggests that Cahokia's monuments may have expressed a layered universe in which political centres were also cosmic centres. Monks Mound, viewed in this way, becomes more than a residence platform. It becomes an artificial mountain raised from a flat floodplain. Its summit approaches the sky. Its mass emerges from the earth. Its position beside the plaza connects elevated authority with the assembled community below. The mound may have represented stability in a landscape shaped by moving water, offering a fixed centre against the uncertainty of flood, season, and change. The leader associated with this place is sometimes imagined as a king, but the word may mislead. Cahokia leaves no crown, throne, written law, or royal genealogy. Authority could have belonged to a single dominant ruler, a sacred lineage, a council of powerful families, or a system that changed across generations. Rich burials and restricted spaces indicate hierarchy, yet they do not reveal exactly how commands were issued or disputes settled. No single model fully explains the evidence. Even so, the concentration of labour at Monks Mound implies extraordinary influence. Someone, or some institution, can direct people to produce food beyond household needs, cut timber, prepare construction surfaces, and move immense volumes of soil. This authority reaches beyond the mound itself. It shapes the plaza, controls access to the central precinct, and organises the city around a monumental core. There is also a quieter message in the mound scale. Ordinary houses decay and are rebuilt. Wooden palisades rot. Individual lives pass quickly. Monks Mound appears permanent by comparison. It tells the people below that the order represented at its summit is larger than any one person. Even when leaders die, the monument remains, waiting for successors to occupy its height. But permanence is partly an illusion. Earthen slopes erode, heavy construction can fail. Sections of Monks Mound show evidence of slumping, where enormous masses of soil shift under their own weight. The builders repair and reshape the structure, confronting the fact that even sacred architecture must obey water, gravity, and unstable ground. From below, however, these struggles are hidden. The mound rises above Cahokia as an image of control. Beneath that image lies continuous maintenance, enormous labour, and a social system that must persuade thousands of people that the world is properly ordered when power stands above them. Below the monumental terraces and the elevated buildings of Cahokia, the city survives through a far less visible structure. The daily movement of food, every mound, ceremony, wall, and public gathering depends on people who plant fields, gather fuel, catch fish, hunt animals, carry water, grind grain, prepare meals, and store enough to survive winter. Cahokia's skyline may express sacred authority, but its true foundation lies in the repetitive labour of households spread across the floodplain. Feeding a city of thousands is different from feeding a village. A small community can move when soils weaken, game becomes scarce, or water conditions change. Cahokia cannot easily relocate. Its monuments anchor it to one place, while its population demands a constant flow of calories. Fields must extend beyond the crowded centre into the surrounding American bottom, where fertile soils offer the possibility of large harvests. Maize becomes the principal crop. But the food system remains broader than a single plant. In spring, fields are cleared and prepared using stone, shell, bone, and wooden tools. Seeds are placed into mounded soil, sometimes alongside squash or other crops that make use of the same cultivated space. The exact methods vary, and archaeology cannot recover every farming decision. But what survives in the record suggests careful knowledge of local soils and seasonal moisture. Farmers must know which ground drains quickly, which areas flood too often, and which ridges remain productive during dry periods. Maize rewards this knowledge with dense harvests that can be dried and stored. Its kernels are ground into meal, boiled into thick dishes, roasted, or combined with other foods. Yet maize requires extensive processing. Dried kernels do not become meals by themselves. They must be shelled, pounded, ground, soaked, mixed, and cooked. Grinding stones and food processing tools preserve traces of this constant work, much of which likely takes place within or near household compounds. The labour is physically demanding. Repeated grinding leaves marks not only on tools but sometimes on human bodies. Kneeling, lifting, carrying, and working fields can produce strain visible in bones. The city's monumental achievements are therefore tied to thousands of smaller actions performed daily, often by people whose names and social positions remain unknown. Storage is equally important. Cahokian households dig pits into the earth, lining or covering them to protect dried crops and seeds. Raised buildings may also have served as granaries, although identifying their exact function is difficult. Stored maize allows the city to survive beyond the harvest season and supports people during ceremonies or construction projects. It also creates vulnerability. Concentrated supplies attract insects, rodents, thieves, and political control. Those who manage stored food may gain influence over those who need it. Surplus can be redistributed during festivals, offered to visiting communities, or used to support specialists and leaders. It may also be demanded as tribute. Scholars still debate how centralized Cahokia's food system becomes. There is no clear evidence of a single state warehouse controlling every harvest. But the scale of public feasting and construction suggests that powerful institutions can mobilize substantial quantities of food. Feasts are more than large meals. They turn abundance into authority. When hundreds gather in a plaza or near a mound, food creates social bonds and displays the organizer's power. Large cooking vessels, animal remains, and concentrations of broken pottery suggest events that exceed ordinary domestic consumption. Such gatherings may follow harvests, burials, political alliances, or episodes of mound construction. Guests eat together, but they also witness who provides the meal, who receives special portions, and who occupies the most prestigious spaces. Cahokia's rivers and wetlands add remarkable variety to the diet. Fish can be caught with nets, hooks, traps, spears, or communal drives. Catfish, drum, gar, and other species move through the Mississippi and its backwaters. Shallow lakes provide turtles and waterfowl. Mussels are gathered from riverbeds, their shells sometimes becoming tools, ornaments, or raw material after the meat is eaten. One lesser-known feature of the American bottom is the importance of seasonal aquatic abundance. Floodwaters create temporary habitats where fish and birds concentrate. A skilled community can harvest large quantities at the right moment, preserving some through drying or smoking. These resources reduce dependence on crops, though they too fluctuate with weather and river conditions. Forests and uplands supply deer, turkey, raccoon, squirrel, and other animals. Deer provide meat, hides, sinew, antler, and bone. Hunting is therefore connected not only to food but also to clothing, tools, and status. Certain animal parts may carry ceremonial meaning or be reserved for particular people. The remains found in elite contexts sometimes differ from those in ordinary household refuse, suggesting that food distribution reflects social rank. Nuts remain important as well. Hickory nuts, walnuts, pecans, acorns, and other gathered foods offer fats and nutrients that maize lacks. Fruits, berries, greens, and cultivated native seeds add further variety. The Cahokian diet is not uniform, and access probably differs by neighborhood, season, wealth, age, and origin. Some residents may eat well during times of abundance, while others experience shortages or nutritional stress. Human remains reveal this uneven reality. Evidence of dental decay increases with heavy maize consumption because starchy foods encourage tooth damage. Some skeletons show signs associated with anemia, infection, or childhood stress. These conditions do not mean that Cahokia is constantly starving. Large ancient cities often contain both abundance and hardship. Food can be plentiful at the level of the society while distributed unequally among individuals. Sanitation adds another pressure. Dense neighborhoods produce refuse, ash, animal waste, and contaminated water. Cahokia has no underground sewer system, and many residents live near pits used for storage or disposal. During wet seasons, waste can move through shallow groundwater and standing pools. Infectious disease may spread more easily among crowded households than in dispersed villages, although the evidence remains incomplete and specific epidemics are difficult to identify. Fuel must also be gathered every day. Cooking maize for long periods consumes wood. So do winter fires, pottery production, building repairs, and ceremonies. The city's population therefore draws constantly upon surrounding forests. Whether this leads to severe deforestation is disputed, but nearby woodlands certainly experience sustained pressure. As local fuel becomes harder to collect, people may travel farther, increasing the daily cost of urban life. Water, too, must be carried. The Mississippi is immense, yet its main channel may not always provide convenient or clean household water. Residents rely on streams, springs, ponds, and other sources across the floodplain. Their quality changes with season, flooding, and settlement density. The city's location among wetlands offers water everywhere, but not all water is equally safe. Cahokia's food system works because it is flexible. Fields, forests, rivers, wetlands, and distant communities all contribute. It also works because thousands of people coordinate their labour through households, kin groups, neighbourhood obligations, and larger political demands. A single poor harvest may be manageable if stored supplies and wild resources remain available. Repeated failures would be far more dangerous. For generations, the system supports the city's growth. Smoke rises from cooking fires before dawn. Grain is ground in courtyards. Canoes return with fish. Hunters carry deer from the uplands. Baskets of produce move toward feasts and construction sites. From the summit of Monks Mound, Cahokia may look like an ordered world. At ground level, that order must be remade with every meal. The people who keep Cahokia alive do not all come from the same villages, speak with the same accents, or carry the same memories of home. The city grows by drawing strangers into its orbit. Some arrive from nearby settlements scattered across the American bottom. Others travel along the Mississippi, Missouri, Illinois, and Ohio river systems from regions hundreds of miles away. They bring tools, food traditions, pottery styles, ceremonial practices, and ways of organizing households that do not always match those already established near the great mounds. For a long time, Cahokia was imagined mainly as the achievement of a single local population that gradually became more complex. Archaeology now reveals a more complicated picture. Chemical signatures preserved in human teeth can reflect the geology of the place where a person spent childhood. When researchers compare those signatures with the local environment, some individuals buried at Cahokia appear to have grown up elsewhere. The method cannot identify every person's exact birthplace, and scholars still debate how broadly the results should be interpreted, but the evidence strongly suggests that migration is central to the city's rise. This means Cahokia is not simply a large settlement. It is a gathering place where different communities are brought into close contact. Some newcomers may arrive willingly, drawn by ceremonies, marriage, trade, fertile land, or the promise of belonging to a powerful centre. Others may come through political pressure, displacement, captivity, or obligations imposed by allied leaders. No single explanation fully accounts for the movement. Ancient migration, like modern migration, can combine hope, necessity, ambition, and fear. The city's neighbourhoods preserve traces of this diversity. Houses are grouped in compounds that may represent extended families, clans, immigrant communities, or people tied by shared work and ritual. Certain areas contain pottery or architectural patterns more common in distant regions. Cooking practices can also reveal identity, the shape of vessels, the way food is prepared, and the ingredients emphasized in household refuse may reflect traditions learned elsewhere and maintained after arrival. These differences do not disappear immediately beneath a single Cahokian culture. People can participate in public ceremonies while preserving private customs. A family may attend gatherings in the Grand Plaza, contribute labour to mound construction, and recognize the authority of Cahokia's leaders, yet continue preparing food in a style inherited from another homeland. Identity is layered. Residents can become Cahokian without ceasing to remember where they came from. This complexity creates opportunity for the city's rulers. A population drawn from many places may be easier to organize around a new shared identity, because no single older village tradition dominates everyone. Monumental architecture offers a common center. Feasts create shared obligations. Public rituals give migrants a place within a larger story. Cahokia's symbols spread through pottery, ornaments, ceremonial objects, and the arrangement of space, gradually teaching residents how the city expects them to belong. Yet diversity also creates tension. Newcomers may compete with established families for land, food, marriage partners, and political influence. Local residents may resent immigrants receiving access to fields or resources. Immigrant neighborhoods may depend on powerful patrons for protection, placing them in vulnerable positions. Differences in language or custom could deepen mistrust, especially during shortages or political conflict. The evidence rarely reveals such tensions directly. Archaeologists find houses, burials, broken vessels, and traces of fire, not the arguments that once filled courtyards. Still, settlement patterns sometimes show neighborhoods being reorganized or abandoned. Some areas appear carefully planned, while others grow more irregularly. These shifts may reflect changing populations, political intervention, or attempts to place diverse groups under closer control. House construction itself can reveal how communities adapt. Most Cahokian homes are modest compared with the monumental buildings at the center. A typical house may shelter a small household within a single rectangular room. Walls are formed from posts and flexible branches, then covered with clay or thatch. Hearths provide heat and cooking space. Mats, hides, baskets, wooden containers, and tools fill the interior, though most decay without leaving visible traces. Around these houses, daily life creates a dense social world. Children learn tasks by watching adults. Food is shared across household boundaries. Tools are borrowed and repaired. News travels through courtyards and paths. Marriages connect neighborhoods. Funerals gather relatives and allies. The city's true cohesion depends on these small relationships as much as on the authority displayed from Monks Mound. Burial practices show both difference and integration. Some people are buried with few possessions, while others receive ornaments, tools, food offerings, or more elaborate treatment. The location of burial may reflect family ties, neighborhood membership, status, or ritual identity. Migrants are not necessarily placed apart from locals. Some appear in the same cemeteries and ceremonial contexts, suggesting that outsiders could become deeply incorporated into Cahokian society. Women may have played a particularly important role in this integration. Marriage can move people between communities, and women often carry agricultural knowledge, cooking traditions, pottery skills, and kinship connections into new households. Some migrants identified through chemical analysis are female, which challenges older assumptions that long-distance movement was dominated by male traders or warriors. Cahokia's growth may have depended as much on families relocating as on individual adventurers. The arrival of entire households would help explain the city's rapid expansion. A ceremonial center visited only by temporary pilgrims cannot sustain dense neighborhoods year after year. Cahokia needs permanent residents who plant crops, raise children, repair houses, and bury their dead. Migration turns ritual attraction into urban permanence. It also extends Cahokia's influence outward. Migrants maintain ties with relatives in distant communities. Through those connections, news, objects, and ceremonial ideas travel beyond the city. A person returning home after years at Cahokia may carry new symbols or social ambitions. A family remaining in the city may receive visitors and goods from its region of origin. Cahokia therefore becomes a human network as much as a geographic place. Some distant communities begin adopting Cahokian practices without becoming direct colonies. Others resist them or reinterpret them. Scholars still debate whether Cahokia controlled a formal political territory or influenced surrounding regions mainly through religion, prestige, and exchange. The evidence suggests power, but not a uniform empire. Within the city, belonging must be renewed constantly. A shared meal, a public game, a construction project, a burial ceremony, or a seasonal gathering can turn strangers into participants. Yet the unity created in the plaza may remain fragile inside the neighborhoods. Cahokia's greatness depends on difference being gathered without being entirely erased. Its people come from many landscapes, but they now live beneath the same rising mounds. The city offers them a new center, a new order, and perhaps a new understanding of who they are. Above their houses, tall wooden posts begin to mark the turning sky. The wooden posts rising beyond Cahokia's neighborhoods are not ordinary parts of houses or walls. They stand in broad circles west of Monks Mound, spaced with enough care to suggest that their position matters. From the centre of one circle, the sun appears to rise near particular posts at important moments of the year. At the equinoxes, it rises close to the direction of Monks Mound. At the solstices, it reaches its northern and southern limits. The structure is sometimes called Woodhenge, a modern name borrowed from comparisons with prehistoric monuments in Europe. But the circle belongs to Cahokia's own world of timber, earth, ceremony, and sky. Several versions of the circle appear to have been built over time. Posts decay and are replaced. New rings may expand or alter the arrangement. The exact number and function of these constructions remain debated, and some alignments may have served purposes beyond observing the sun. Yet the basic pattern suggests that Cahokians could mark the changing year with impressive accuracy. This did not require written calendars or metal instruments. It required generations of observation, a clear horizon, and a community that understood why certain days mattered. The rising sun is not merely an astronomical event. It marks the return of planting seasons, the approach of harvest, the lengthening and shortening of days, and the timing of collective obligations. A city dependent on maize cannot treat the calendar casually. Fields must be prepared at the correct time. Ceremonies must gather people before or after crucial agricultural work. Leaders who can announce seasonal transitions appear to stand in harmony with powers larger than any household. On significant mornings, people may have assembled before dawn near the timber circle. The floodplain lies dark and cool. Mist gathers in low ground. The great mound is only a deeper shadow against the eastern sky. Then light begins to spread behind it. The sun rises near a designated post or monumental structure, transforming an ordinary horizon into a public confirmation that the world remains ordered. No account survives describing such a ceremony, so the details must remain cautious. There may have been songs, offerings, fasting, feasting, processions, or complete silence. Certain people may have been permitted inside the circle while others watched from beyond. What survives in the record suggests repeated attention to celestial movement, but not the words or gestures through which Cahokians explained it. The city itself may have functioned as a calendar of a broader kind. Monks Mound, the Grand Plaza, smaller mounds, causeways, timber circles, and water features are positioned in relationships that guide movement and sight. Some alignments appear connected to cardinal directions, others may reflect sunrise positions, sacred routes, or divisions between social groups. Not every straight line is necessarily intentional, and scholars still debate how much of Cahokia's layout was governed by a single master plan. Even so, the concentration of ordered space is difficult to dismiss. Cahokia's public ceremonies likely draw together agriculture, politics, memory, and cosmology. A harvest festival can thank spiritual forces while redistributing food. A burial can honour the dead while confirming the status of a ruling lineage. A mound dedication can renew the city while reminding participants who controls labour. Religion is not a separate activity confined to certain buildings. It shapes when people gather, how they interpret the landscape, and why they accept the demands placed upon them. The Grand Plaza becomes essential to this ceremonial life. Its enormous open surface allows thousands to witness events together. Some gatherings may involve dances or processions moving between mounds. Others may centre on feasting, public announcements, competitive games, or displays of captives and tribute. People standing at the edges see elevated figures on mound summits and perhaps sacred objects carried through the crowd. The scale of participation turns belief into a shared physical experience. One activity associated with Mississippian public spaces is the game known today as chunky. Players roll a polished stone disc across the ground, while others throw long spears or staffs toward the point where they expect it to stop. The game demands skill, timing, and judgment. It can draw spectators, wagers, rivalries, and regional competition. Images of chunky players appear on objects from the wider Mississippian world, suggesting that the game may have carried ceremonial and political meaning as well as entertainment. At Cahokia, a large plaza would provide an ideal setting. Teams or champions representing different communities could compete before enormous crowds. Victory might bring prestige to a neighborhood or allied settlement. Gambling could redistribute valuables. Leaders sponsoring the event could turn competition into unity, at least temporarily. A city containing migrants from many regions needs occasions when difference is expressed without becoming open conflict. The ritual calendar may also include large-scale feasts tied to seasonal renewal. Maize, venison, fish, birds, nuts, and other foods are prepared in quantities far beyond ordinary household meals. Special vessels are used, broken, discarded, or perhaps deliberately deposited. Participants receive food according to rules that may reflect status, kinship, or ceremonial role. The feast provides nourishment, but its deeper purpose is to create obligation. Those who accept food from powerful hosts enter relationships of gratitude, loyalty, and expectation. Fire plays a central role in many indigenous ceremonial traditions, though Cahokia's precise practices cannot be reconstructed directly. Hearths may represent household continuity, while larger public fires mark purification, renewal, or communication with spiritual powers. Old fires might be extinguished, and new ones kindled at important transitions. Smoke rising above the city would make ritual visible, even to those too distant to witness the central event. The Cahokian cosmos may have been understood as layered and interconnected. Later traditions from parts of the southeast describe an upper world associated with order, celestial powers, and certain birds, a middle world inhabited by humans, and a lower realm linked with water, fertility, danger, and powerful beings. Archaeologists often use these traditions carefully when interpreting Mississippian imagery. Direct continuity cannot simply be assumed. But recurring symbols suggest that Cahokia's people also imagine the universe through relationships among sky, earth, water, animals, ancestors, and directions. The city materializes those relationships. Mounds lift selected buildings upward, plazas create the human center. Wetlands and rivers surround the settlement with water. Burials place the dead within carefully shaped earth. Tall posts connect ground and sky. Ceremonial leaders move through this environment as mediators between realms, making political authority appear necessary to the continuation of cosmic balance. This creates a powerful but demanding system. When harvests succeed and ceremonies unfold as expected, Cahokia's order seems confirmed. When drought, flood, disease, or conflict interrupts the cycle, doubt can spread. Leaders who claim harmony with the cosmos must explain why disorder has entered the world. Ritual power can strengthen a city, but it can also become vulnerable when visible results fail to match sacred promises. For now, the calendar continues. Posts cast long shadows across the ground. Crowds gather beneath the changing sky. The sun rises where it is expected, and Cahokia appears to stand at the center of time itself. The order displayed in Cahokia's plazas and solar alignments has a darker counterpart beneath the earth, south of Monks Mound. Inside a monument known today as Mound 72, archaeologists uncovered one of the most complex burial areas in the city. The mound contains multiple graves, carefully arranged bodies, valuable objects, and evidence of violent death. It reveals that Cahokia's sacred authority was not sustained only through feasts, games, and public celebration. Power also reached into the treatment of the dead and, in some cases, into the deliberate taking of human life. Mound 72 is modest compared with the enormous platform at the city's centre. Its importance lies not in height but in what was placed inside it. The mound appears to have been built through several episodes, incorporating earlier posts, structures, and burials. Its alignment may connect with important solar directions, suggesting that the location was chosen within Cahokia's wider ceremonial geography. As with so much at the site, the mound is not a single event frozen in time. It is a layered record of changing rituals and political decisions. The most famous discovery was a richly furnished central burial, associated with thousands of shell beads. When excavated, the beads appeared to form the image of a bird or falcon beneath two individuals, leading archaeologists to describe the arrangement as a beaded burial. The bird motif seemed to connect the dead with the upper world, warfare, celestial power, or a heroic figure known through later indigenous traditions. For decades, the scene was interpreted as an elite man laid upon a symbolic bird, accompanied by a woman who may have been sacrificed to follow him into death. Later analysis complicated that story. Researchers re-examining skeletal evidence concluded that both central individuals may have been male, while additional people buried nearby included both men and women. The celebrated image of a solitary male ruler resting beside a sacrificed female was therefore not secure. Even the exact pattern formed by the beads remains difficult to reconstruct, because the burial had collapsed, shifted, and decayed before excavation. What once appeared to be a clear royal scene has become a warning about how quickly modern expectations can harden into archaeological fact. The central individuals were not buried alone. Around them lay other bodies, some carefully placed and others treated with far less dignity. Several graves contained groups of people arranged in rows. One burial held more than 50 young women, most of similar age. Another contained men whose bodies showed signs of violent death, with missing hands or heads in some cases. A separate mass grave included men and women who may have been killed at the same time. The evidence strongly suggests that at least some of these people did not die naturally. Human sacrifice is therefore one of the most disturbing possibilities raised by Cahokia. The term should be used carefully. Archaeologists cannot know the exact beliefs surrounding each death, and not every unusual burial is necessarily a sacrifice. Some individuals may have been captives, executed enemies, servants, political rivals, or people selected for ritual roles whose meaning is now lost. Yet the scale, arrangement, and simultaneous burial of certain groups make deliberate killing difficult to avoid. If these deaths were sacrifices, they may have served several purposes at once. They could accompany the funeral of an important leader, providing attendance in an afterlife. They might dedicate a mound, renew the city's sacred order, or display the ability of Cahokia's rulers to command life and death. Captives taken in warfare could be transformed into ritual offerings, turning military victory into public ceremony. The killing of socially vulnerable people could also reinforce hierarchy by demonstrating that some lives were valued very differently from others. The young women buried together have attracted particular attention. Earlier interpretations sometimes imagined them as local attendants sacrificed for an elite man. More recent studies suggest that some may have come from outside Cahokia, though chemical evidence cannot always identify origins precisely. They may have been captives brought from distant communities, members of a dependent population, or participants in a ritual category that no longer survives in recognizable form. Scholars still debate who they were, and the evidence remains incomplete. Their treatment contrasts sharply with the central burial. Elite individuals are surrounded by shell beads, projectile points, mica, copper, and other carefully selected materials. Others are placed in crowded graves without comparable offerings. This difference is not accidental. Mound 72 presents a society in which death reproduces inequality. The honoured dead become the focus of monument building, while other bodies become part of the monument itself. Many valuable materials found in the mound come from distant regions. Marine shell travels from the Gulf Coast. Copper originates near the Great Lakes. Mica and certain stones arrive through long exchange networks. Their presence links elite authority with the wider continent. To bury such objects is to remove them from ordinary use, converting wealth into sacred display. Cahokia's leaders demonstrate that they can gather rare materials, skilled labour, and human bodies into a single controlled ceremony. The projectile points deposited in Mound 72 are especially striking. Hundreds were made from stone obtained from different regions and arranged in groups. They may represent offerings from allied communities, symbols of warriors, or collections tied to political territories. Their diversity suggests that the burial ceremony reached far beyond a single household. The dead at its centre may have embodied relationships among many communities, making the mound a political statement as much as a grave. Yet archaeology cannot tell whether the people watching these rituals accepted them willingly. Some may have viewed sacrifice as necessary for cosmic balance. Others may have obeyed out of fear. Families of victims may have experienced grief or humiliation. Captive outsiders may have understood the ceremony entirely differently from Cahokian elites. Public ritual can create unity for some while revealing domination to others. Mound 72 also shows how interpretations change. Early excavators worked with limited methods and cultural assumptions shaped by their own time. Later researchers revisited field notes, photographs, skeletal remains, and bead distributions, overturning parts of the original story. This does not make archaeology unreliable. It reveals how knowledge improves when evidence is questioned rather than forced into a familiar narrative. What remains certain is that Cahokia's beauty and violence belong to the same world. The timber circles that track the sun, the feasts that gather neighbourhoods, and the burials beneath Mound 72 all express a belief that human action can maintain order. But that order is unequal. Some people stand on mound summits, some are honoured beneath thousands of beads, others enter the earth in rows, their deaths absorbed into the authority of the city. Above them, Cahokia continues to expand its influence far beyond the floodplain. Cahokia's power does not end at the edge of the American bottom. From the city's central plazas and mound complexes, objects, symbols, travellers, and ideas move outward along the great river systems of North America. Some travel north toward the upper Mississippi and the Great Lakes. Others follow the Missouri westward, the Ohio eastward, or the Mississippi south toward the Gulf. The city stands at a natural crossroads, and at its height that position allows Cahokia to become more than a local capital. It becomes the centre of a far-reaching cultural world. The evidence for these connections survives in materials that could not have originated near the city. Copper arrives from the Great Lakes region. Marine shell comes from the Gulf Coast. Mica, distinctive stones, pigments, and finely made tools travel from distant landscapes. Their movement does not necessarily mean that Cahokian merchants personally crossed the entire continent. Goods can pass through many hands, moving from community to community through exchange, gift-giving, marriage alliances, pilgrimage, tribute, and political obligation. The routes are not marked by paved roads or permanent trading stations. Rivers provide the most efficient paths. A large canoe can carry people, food, stone, pottery, hides, and ceremonial objects far more easily than travellers moving overland. River journeys remain dangerous, shaped by floods, snags, storms, shifting channels, and political boundaries. But they connect communities across distances that would otherwise be difficult to bridge. Travellers approaching Cahokia may arrive with practical goods, but the city's most influential exports are often symbolic. Artistic styles associated with the wider Mississippian world depict birds of prey, warriors, human figures, severed heads, sacred hands, crosses, serpents, and beings combining human and animal features. These images appear on engraved shell cups, copper plates, pottery, stone objects, and ornaments found across a vast region. Their exact meanings are uncertain, but they seem connected to warfare, ancestry, fertility, celestial power, and the structure of the cosmos. Earlier archaeologists grouped many of these images under the name Southeastern Ceremonial Complex, as though they belonged to a single standardized religion. Modern researchers tend to be more cautious. Symbols can change meaning as they travel. A bird figure used in one community to represent a heroic ancestor may be understood elsewhere as a war emblem or a celestial being. There is no reason to assume that every society receiving Cahokian-style objects accepts the same beliefs or submits to the same authority. Even so, Cahokia appears to play an important role in spreading a new ceremonial vocabulary. Its population, monuments, and gatherings bring together people from many regions. Visitors witness public rituals, athletic games, feasts, burials, and displays of elite power. They may return home carrying objects or memories that inspire changes in their own communities. In this way, Cahokia's influence travels through imitation as much as direct command. Some settlements far from the city show signs of unusually close Cahokian contact. Their houses, pottery, mound arrangements, or ceremonial objects resemble patterns found in the American bottom. A few may have been founded by migrants from Cahokia, or by groups strongly connected to it. Others appear to adopt selected features while preserving local traditions. Scholars still debate whether these distant sites were colonies, allied centres, religious outposts, or independent communities borrowing prestigious ideas. This debate matters because Cahokia is sometimes described as the capital of an empire. The word captures the scale of its influence, but may imply a level of territorial control that the evidence does not prove. There are no surviving written orders, standardized taxes, permanent military garrisons, or clear administrative boundaries. Cahokia may have dominated nearby communities while exercising looser influence farther away. Its power could have depended on sacred prestige, marriage, trade, intimidation, and the ability to attract people rather than on direct rule over a fixed territory. Close to the city, the relationship was probably more demanding. Satellite settlements across the American bottom may have supplied maize, timber, fish, labour, and other resources to the central precinct. Local leaders could have been tied to Cahokian elites through kinship and ceremonial obligations. Mound centres outside the urban core may have organised rural populations while reinforcing the authority of the city. Farther away, Cahokia's power may have been felt differently. A distant community could value shell ornaments associated with the city without recognising its political leadership. A local chief might adopt Cahokian imagery to strengthen personal status. Pilgrims might visit the great mounds and return home with sacred objects. Warriors might travel to the city for alliances or competition. Craftspeople could imitate prestigious designs while adapting them to local beliefs. The chunky game offers one possible vehicle for this influence. Polished stone discs associated with the game appear across wide areas, and artistic images of players become part of Mississippian symbolism. Competitive gatherings may have connected communities that otherwise remained politically separate. A skilled player could gain fame beyond his home settlement, while leaders hosting tournaments could create alliances through spectacle, gambling, and feasting. The game's spread shows how culture can travel through pleasure and rivalry, not only through conquest. Pottery provides another clue. Cahokian vessels appear in distant locations, while non-local styles are found within the city. These objects reveal movement in both directions. Some pots may have carried food or ceremonial substances, others may have travelled with migrants. Because pottery is often made within households, its style can preserve personal identity more clearly than elite ornaments. A foreign-looking cooking vessel in a Cahokian neighbourhood may represent not trade, but a person continuing the practices of home. Cahokia also exports people. During its rapid expansion, migrants arrive at the city, but movement does not occur only inward. Cahokian families, ritual specialists, traders, or political agents may establish themselves in other regions. Their presence could explain sudden changes at distant settlements. Yet the evidence rarely distinguishes peaceful migration from organised expansion. No single explanation fully accounts for every site linked to Cahokia. Rare materials found in elite burials demonstrate that long-distance networks also serve hierarchy. Copper, shell, and exotic stone are valuable partly because they come from far away. Their distance gives them mystery. A leader who possesses them appears connected to powers and places beyond the experience of ordinary households. When such objects are buried, displayed, or given as gifts, they transform geography into political prestige. But exchange creates dependence. Cahokia's authority benefits from networks that carry goods and people toward the centre. If those networks weaken, the city loses more than luxury materials. It loses alliances, information, visitors, and the ability to present itself as the heart of a larger world. Distant communities can choose new partners. Local leaders can reject Cahokian styles. Migrants can leave as easily as they arrived. At its height, however, the flow continues. Canoes approach through misty channels. Visitors step onto the floodplain carrying shell, copper, stone, food, and news. They see Monks Mound rising above the city and crowds gathering in the Grand Plaza. Some remain, others depart with Cahokia's symbols etched into memory. The city's reach is vast, but its control is never absolute. Beneath the appearance of unity, competing loyalties remain, and as walls rise around Cahokia's central precinct, the need to protect its power becomes increasingly difficult to ignore. The walls surrounding Cahokia's central precinct do not rise at the beginning of the city's expansion. They appear after monumental authority is already established, after Monks Mound dominates the skyline and the Grand Plaza has become the stage for collective life. Their arrival therefore marks a change. A city once defined by openness, gathering, and attraction begins to place a massive wooden boundary around its ceremonial heart. The palisade is rebuilt several times. Each version requires thousands of heavy posts, cut from surrounding forests, transported across the floodplain, and set closely together in deep trenches. Projecting bastions interrupt the wall at intervals, creating positions from which defenders might watch or attack anyone approaching the enclosure. Gates regulate entry. The result is not a temporary fence, but a formidable structure that consumes enormous labour and timber. Its exact purpose remains uncertain. The bastions look defensive, and the wall could protect leaders, sacred buildings, stored goods, and the people gathered inside during an attack. Yet archaeologists have not uncovered clear evidence of a single invading army that forced Cahokia to fortify itself. The palisade may also have controlled access to ceremonies, separated elite space from ordinary neighbourhoods, or symbolised the boundary between the sacred centre and the less ordered world outside. These explanations are not mutually exclusive. A wall can defend, divide, impress, and intimidate at the same time. Whatever the intention, it changes how Cahokia feels. The Grand Plaza and Monks Mound remain central to public identity, but they are no longer approached freely from every direction. Residents who once saw the monumental core as part of an open urban landscape now encounter gates and barriers. The centre belongs to the whole city symbolically, yet physically it becomes restricted. This contradiction may reflect a leadership increasingly concerned with control. Urban life beyond the wall is becoming more difficult to manage. Neighbourhoods contain people of different origins, social positions, and political loyalties. Some households live near important mounds or ceremonial spaces. Others occupy crowded districts farther from the centre. Access to fertile land, clean water, prestigious goods, and influential relationships is unlikely to be equal. The same city that creates a shared Cahokian identity also produces sharper distinctions between those who command labour and those who provide it. Evidence from burials and housing suggests hierarchy, though it does not reveal a simple class system. Some people receive elaborate funerary treatment and rare objects. Most are buried with little display. Certain buildings are unusually large or elevated, while ordinary houses remain modest and frequently rebuilt. Food remains also indicate differences in consumption. Elite gatherings may feature preferred cuts of meat, special animals, and large quantities of prepared food that are not available to every household. Inequality becomes especially dangerous when abundance falters. A successful harvest can disguise resentment because feasts, gifts, and stored supplies circulate through the city. During shortages, people notice who continues to eat well, whose granaries remain protected, and whose children show signs of stress. Leaders who claim to maintain cosmic and social order must explain why hardship falls unevenly. The city's density creates pressures that no mound can solve. Refuse accumulates around houses. Storage pits become contaminated after repeated use. Cooking fires fill the air with smoke. Human and animal waste collect in a landscape where water already moves unpredictably across low ground. Shallow wells, ponds, and streams can become polluted, especially during floods or periods of heavy rain. Disease thrives where people live closely together. Respiratory infections, intestinal illness, and childhood malnutrition may spread more easily in crowded districts than in smaller, dispersed settlements. Skeletal remains from Cahokia and nearby communities show evidence of physical stress, although specific diseases and causes are often difficult to identify. The record does not support a simple claim that an epidemic destroyed the city, but it does suggest that urban life carried biological costs. Women may have borne some of the heaviest burdens: farming, food processing, childcare, pottery production, fuel gathering, and household maintenance require constant labour. Grinding maize day after day places strain on joints and muscles. Pregnancy and childbirth become more dangerous when nutrition is poor or infections are common. Migrant women without strong local kin networks may be especially vulnerable, although some could also gain status through marriage, craft knowledge, or connections between communities. Children grow up amid both opportunity and risk. They witness ceremonies, markets, games, and visitors from distant regions. They also face contaminated water, crowded houses, seasonal hunger, and the possibility of losing parents to illness or violence. Signs of interrupted growth preserved in teeth and bones reveal that some survive repeated episodes of stress. These traces are small compared with the Great Mounds, but they record the human price of concentration. Timber demand adds another pressure. Houses, palisades, temples, cooking fires, and mound-top buildings consume wood continuously. Nearby forest may become thinner or more heavily managed as residents travel farther for fuel and construction material. The scale of deforestation remains disputed, and pollen evidence does not support every earlier claim of total ecological destruction. Still, The repeated rebuilding of the palisade alone represents a substantial demand on the surrounding landscape. There may also be political enemies. Cahokia's influence creates winners and losers across the region. Communities required to provide labour or food may resist. Rival leaders may challenge the city's authority. Captives and violent burials indicate that warfare is not unknown. The palisade's defensive design suggests that the possibility of attack was taken seriously, even if the identity of the threat remains uncertain. Danger could come from within as easily as from outside. A dense, diverse population contains competing factions. Elite families may struggle over succession. Ritual authorities may disagree about ceremonies or the distribution of tribute. Neighborhoods could align with different leaders. When a powerful ruler dies, the process of replacing that person may expose divisions normally hidden beneath public ritual. The repeated reconstruction of monuments may reflect attempts to restore unity during such moments. A new mound stage, rebuilt temple, enlarged plaza, or renewed palisade can proclaim that order has returned. Public labour gathers communities under central direction. Ceremonies transform political repair into cosmic renewal. Yet the need to repeat these acts may also show that unity is becoming harder to sustain. Cahokia remains impressive. Its mounds still tower over the floodplain. Canoes still arrive. Fields still produce maize. Crowds still gather for ceremonies and games. There is no single moment when everyone realizes the city has entered decline. Urban systems rarely fail in such a clear way. Strain accumulates quietly in longer journeys for firewood. Poorer water, contested harvests, guarded entrances, abandoned houses, and obligations that feel heavier than they once did. Behind the palisade, Cahokia's rulers continue to present the centre as stable. Outside it, the city's many neighbourhoods carry the weight of that stability. The wall may keep enemies away, but it cannot prevent mistrust, hunger, illness, or political fracture from taking root within the same sacred landscape. Beyond Cahokia's walls, another form of instability is developing, one that no ruler can command and no ceremony can permanently contain. The city depends on a landscape that has always been generous because it is restless. The Mississippi and its neighbouring rivers bring fertile soil, fish, water, and transportation, but they also shift their channels, flood low ground, erode banks, and transform lakes into marshes. For generations, Cahokia's people prosper by understanding these movements. As the city grows larger, however, it becomes less able to absorb environmental surprises. A village of several dozen households can relocate when a river changes course, or when fields become unreliable. A metropolis built around enormous mounds cannot move so easily. Its ceremonial centre, political institutions, and densely occupied neighbourhoods are fixed within the floodplain. The more labour invested in Cahokia, the more difficult it becomes to abandon vulnerable ground. Monumental permanence begins to conflict with environmental flexibility. The climate of Cahokia's rise may have supported relatively reliable maize farming. Warmer conditions and adequate rainfall can lengthen growing seasons and produce large harvests in the central Mississippi Valley. Yet such broad patterns do not mean every year is favourable. Summers can become dry, spring rains can arrive too late or too heavily. A single flood can destroy newly planted fields, while drought can reduce yields across a much wider region. Researchers reconstruct these changes through tree rings, lake sediments, pollen, river deposits, and other natural archives. Each source preserves a different part of the past, and none provides a perfect year-by-year record for Cahokia. Scholars still debate the timing and severity of specific droughts and floods, but the evidence suggests that the centuries following the city's peak brought greater climatic variability. Conditions that once supported expansion may have become less dependable. Drought poses an obvious danger to a maize-dependent population. Corn requires sufficient moisture during critical stages of growth. If rainfall fails repeatedly, even fertile soil cannot guarantee a harvest. Families can turn to fish, nuts, wild plants, and stored grain. But these alternatives have limits when tens of thousands of people depend upon the same landscape. A shortage is not only a nutritional crisis, but it becomes a political test. Cahokia's leaders draw authority from their ability to organize ceremonies, distribute food, and present the city as the center of an ordered world. If fields fail while elite storehouses remain protected, resentment deepens. If public rituals intended to restore balance are followed by another poor season, sacred confidence may weaken. Environmental stress becomes social stress because people experience nature through systems of power. Flooding creates a different threat. Floodwaters can destroy houses, contaminate drinking sources, damage stored food, and force residents onto higher ground. They can also leave new layers of fertile sediment, making floods both destructive and beneficial. The central question is not whether the Mississippi floods it always has, but whether major floods occurred often enough and close enough to occupied districts to disrupt Cahokia's stability. Sediments from nearby lakes have been interpreted as evidence for unusually large flood events during parts of Cahokia's history. Some researchers argue that the city's rise occurred during a relatively calm period, and that renewed major flooding later contributed to its decline. Others caution that lake deposits are difficult to date precisely, and may record local conditions rather than a single catastrophe affecting the entire urban region. The evidence remains incomplete, and no excavated layer shows one overwhelming flood suddenly erasing Cahokia. Instead, repeated moderate disasters may have mattered more than a single legendary event. A damaged harvest can be survived, a flooded neighborhood can be rebuilt, but when failures recur over decades, households begin to reconsider the value of remaining. People may move toward relatives on higher ground, abandon marginal fields, or refuse obligations to leaders who can no longer offer security. Cahokia's own transformation of the landscape may intensify some risks. Large areas are cleared for houses, plazas, fields, roads, and construction. Trees are cut for fuel, walls, and buildings. Wetlands are crossed or altered. Soil is excavated from borrow pits and carried into mounds. These changes can affect drainage, erosion, and the availability of nearby resources. Earlier interpretations sometimes portrayed Cahokia as a society that destroyed its environment through uncontrolled deforestation and overuse. The image was dramatic: forests vanished, erosion filled streams, wildlife retreated, and the city collapsed beneath the consequences of its own excess. More recent research has challenged the simplicity of that story. Pollen records do not always show the severe local deforestation once assumed, and Cahokians may have managed forests and floodplain resources more effectively than earlier scholars recognized. This does not mean environmental pressure was absent. Even sustainable practices become strained when population grows rapidly. Firewood must be gathered from increasing distances. Fields near the city may lose productivity or become contested. Game animals may avoid heavily occupied zones. Timber suitable for large posts becomes harder to find nearby. The issue is not necessarily complete ecological devastation, but the rising cost of maintaining urban life. Soil exhaustion is another debated factor. Maize removes nutrients, particularly when planted repeatedly in the same fields. Floodplain sediments can renew fertility, and farmers may rotate plots, allow fallow periods, or use different landscape zones. Archaeology cannot fully reconstruct these decisions. What survives suggests capable agricultural knowledge, not careless farming. Yet even skilled farmers face limits when political demands require constant surplus. The river system also shapes trade. Changing channels can alter canoe routes, isolate landing places, or redirect traffic away from established settlements. If Cahokia's access to certain waterways becomes less convenient, its regional centrality may weaken. A city dependent on movement can be affected by subtle geographical changes long before a channel completely disappears. Environmental explanations are appealing because they seem to offer a clear cause for collapse. Drought ruins crops, floods destroy neighborhoods, deforestation removes fuel, the city then empties. Cahokia's actual history resists that simplicity. People adapt to difficult environments. They store food, move fields, rebuild houses, diversify diets, and relocate neighborhoods. Climate stress alone does not explain why political authority weakens, why certain rituals change, or why some communities remain while others depart. Nor can social explanations ignore the landscape. Political conflict becomes more severe during scarcity. Disease spreads more easily after flooding contaminates water. Migration accelerates when fields repeatedly fail. A weakened government finds it harder to organize repairs, distribute food, or coordinate collective labor. Environmental and social pressures do not act separately. They reinforce one another. By the 13th century, Cahokia still stands. But its relationship with the floodplain is changing. The city no longer appears to command endless abundance. Every difficult season exposes the fragility beneath monumental confidence. The mounds remain massive, yet the system around them depends on harvests, timber, water, and trust resources that cannot be piled into permanent forms. No single drought, flood, or ecological mistake fully accounts for what follows. The greater danger lies in accumulation. A poor harvest here, a damaged district there, a longer search for fuel, a polluted water source, a disputed distribution of stored maize. None destroys the city alone. Together, they narrow the range of choices available to its people, and when a city's inhabitants begin to believe that life may be easier somewhere else, departure does not need to happen all at once. Cahokia does not vanish in a single night. There is no final wall of fire, no unmistakable battlefield covering the city, and no moment when every resident gathers possessions and walks away together. The decline unfolds unevenly, neighborhood by neighborhood and generation by generation. Houses disappear from places that were once crowded. Mounds cease to grow. Public spaces are used differently. Long-distance connections weaken. The great city remains visible. But the human system that gave it meaning begins to contract. This process may begin not long after Cahokia reaches its greatest size. Population estimates vary widely, partly because houses are rebuilt repeatedly and not every structure is occupied at the same time. Even so, archaeological patterns suggest that the city's most intense growth is relatively brief. By the 12th and 13th centuries, some districts are already thinning while others remain active. The decline is therefore not a simple line descending at the same rate everywhere. A house abandoned in an ancient city can mean many things. Its occupants may have died, moved across the settlement, joined relatives in another neighborhood, or left the region entirely. A cluster of abandoned houses is more significant, especially when rebuilding does not follow. When such patterns spread across multiple districts, they reveal a city losing residents faster than it replaces them. The reasons for individual departures are rarely preserved. A family may leave after repeated crop failures, a dispute with local leaders, the death of a household head, or an invitation from relatives elsewhere. Some may seek safer ground beyond the floodplain. Others may move to smaller communities where obligations are lighter and resources easier to control. Cahokia's decline is ultimately made from thousands of personal decisions that archaeology can recognize only in aggregate. The city's wooden architecture makes this unraveling difficult to see from the surface. Houses rot and collapse. Palisade posts decay. Roofs disappear. Grass and shrubs cover abandoned compounds. Unlike a stone city whose empty walls can remain standing for centuries, Cahokia can lose much of its visible urban fabric within a few generations. The mounds endure, but the spaces between them gradually return to fields, brush, and wetland. Monument building also slows. During Cahokia's rise, enormous construction projects create and enlarge mounds, clear plazas, and redefine the ceremonial center. Later, this activity becomes less intense. Some monuments continue to be maintained or modified, but the scale of coordinated labor declines. This matters because construction is not merely practical. It is one of the ways Cahokia's leaders demonstrate their ability to mobilize communities. When people stop contributing labor, the political meaning is profound. They may no longer possess enough surplus time or food. They may distrust those directing the work. They may have moved beyond the reach of central authority. Whatever the reason, a city built through collective effort begins to weaken when collective projects can no longer be sustained. The palisade offers another clue. Its repeated rebuilding suggests that the central precinct remains important even as conditions change. Yet each reconstruction consumes enormous resources. If population and authority are declining, maintaining the wall becomes more difficult. At some point, the protected center may stand as a symbol of power that fewer people are willing or able to support. Ritual life changes as well. Ceremonies likely continue, because sacred places do not lose meaning immediately when political systems weaken. Families may still visit ancestral mounds, bury their dead, gather for seasonal events, or remember the city as the center of an older order. But public rituals capable of drawing enormous crowds require food, coordination, and confidence. As neighborhoods empty and regional alliances loosen, the scale of gatherings probably diminishes. The decline of Cahokia's influence is visible beyond the city. Communities that once adopted Cahokian objects or practices begin developing along different paths. Exchange networks continue across the Mississippi Valley, but the city no longer appears to dominate them as before. Distant leaders find new sources of prestige. Migrants establish identities in other settlements. Symbols associated with Cahokia survive, yet they are reinterpreted without the city controlling their meaning. This is an important distinction. Cahokia's political contraction does not mean Mississippian culture disappears. Across eastern North America, mound centers continue to rise, flourish, and transform for centuries. Complex societies remain active long after Cahokia's decline. Agricultural communities maintain trade, ceremony, warfare, and regional leadership. The people leaving Cahokia do not vanish from history. They carry knowledge, traditions, and relationships into other places. Some may move north or south along the Mississippi. Others may travel east toward the Ohio Valley or west into Missouri. Their destinations are difficult to trace because pottery and architecture do not always identify ancestry clearly. Chemical studies of human remains can reveal migration into Cahokia more easily than they can follow people after departure. The evidence remains incomplete, and no single later community can be named as the sole heir of the city. Within the American bottom, occupation continues after the urban peak. Smaller settlements remain, and some areas are reoccupied after periods of reduced population. This means the entire region is not suddenly deserted. The landscape still offers fertile soil, fish, timber, and river access. What disappears is the extraordinary concentration of people and authority around the central mounds. By the 14th century, the transformation is unmistakable. The great plazas no longer fill with the same crowds. Smoke no longer rises from dense neighborhoods in every direction. Buildings on mound summits decay without replacement. Paths fade. Borrow pits fill with water. The city that once pulled people from distant regions can no longer hold even many of those born within it. Yet Monks Mound remains. Its terraces still rise above the floodplain, maintaining the shape of authority after the institutions associated with it have weakened. Smaller mounds stand nearby like fragments of a broken arrangement. Anyone crossing the landscape can see that something immense once existed here. The monuments preserve the outline of a city while concealing how gradually its life has drained away. There may never have been a final resident who understood that Cahokia had ended. People living among the mounds probably did not divide history neatly into rise, peak, and collapse. They experienced changing harvests, departures, ceremonies, conflicts, and memories. A shrinking city can still feel like home. An ancient order can survive in belief long after it has ceased to function at its former scale. Cahokia's end is therefore not an event but a long separation between monuments and people. The mounds stay where they were built. The population moves, disperses, and reorganizes. What once appeared permanent becomes an inherited landscape of empty spaces. The city has unraveled. The deeper mystery is why so many people finally chose not to rebuild it. The reason Cahokia was not rebuilt cannot be reduced to a single disaster. Its abandonment is best understood as the failure of several systems that had once reinforced one another. Agriculture supported population growth. Population supplied labor. Labor raised monuments. Monuments strengthened sacred authority. Sacred authority organized feasts, alliances, and public projects. When enough parts of that structure weakened at the same time, the city's enormous size became less an advantage than a burden. Climate stress may have been one part of the process. Periods of drought could reduce maize harvests, while flooding could damage fields, contaminate water, and force households from low ground. Yet difficult weather alone does not explain why Cahokia declined while people continued living elsewhere in the Mississippi Valley. Communities had survived droughts and floods before. Environmental stress becomes decisive only when political institutions can no longer respond effectively, or when residents no longer believe that sacrifice for the central system is worthwhile. Political fragmentation offers another possibility. Cahokia may never have been governed by one permanent royal dynasty. Authority could have been divided among powerful lineages, ritual leaders, neighborhood heads, and allied communities. Such a system can expand rapidly when leaders cooperate around a shared sacred center. It can also fracture when succession becomes disputed or when rival groups no longer accept the same hierarchy. The death of an influential ruler may have opened struggles over who controlled Monks Mound, the grand plaza, stored food, and access to ceremonial power. Competing factions could continue using the same symbols while disagreeing over who had the right to represent them. Archaeology rarely identifies a civil conflict directly, but rebuilding, enclosure, altered burial practices, and changing settlement patterns can reflect instability without preserving the names of those involved. The palisade may be evidence of that insecurity. It could have protected Cahokia's centre against external enemies. Yet it may also have guarded elites from the wider population. If leaders felt threatened by the people whose labour supported them, the city's sacred heart had become politically isolated. Walls can preserve authority temporarily, but they also reveal that trust is failing. Warfare remains a possible factor. Cahokia's growth may have displaced neighbouring communities, demanded tribute, or disrupted older political relationships. Captives and violent burials show that organised violence existed within its world. Rival centres may have challenged Cahokian power, while communities once drawn to the city could have turned against it. However, no vast battlefield or destruction layer proves that a conquering army suddenly ended Cahokia. Conflict was more likely chronic. Regional and intertwined with migration rather than a single decisive invasion. Religious change may have been equally important. Cahokia's leaders seem to have connected political authority with cosmic order. The city's plazas, timber circles, mounds, burials, and seasonal ceremonies created a powerful belief that Cahokia occupied a central place in the universe. Such a system depends on repeated confirmation. The sun must rise where expected, crops must return, ceremonies must renew balance, leaders must appear capable of mediating between human society and sacred forces. When harvests fail, floods return, or violence increases, people may question whether the centre still possesses that power. Ritual systems do not disappear immediately after disappointment, but confidence can shift. Families may begin favouring local ceremonies over enormous public gatherings. Smaller communities may build their own sacred centres. Regional leaders may adopt Cahokian symbols while rejecting Cahokian authority. The religion survives, but the city loses its exclusive claim to organise it. Social inequality may have accelerated this loss of trust. Elite burials, restricted spaces, and the concentration of ceremonial power indicate that Cahokia was not an equal society. During prosperity, hierarchy may have been accepted through feasting, protection, shared identity, and the promise of cosmic stability. Under pressure, the same hierarchy could appear exploitative. Households supplying maize, timber, and labour may have received less in return. People living beyond the protected centre may have decided that the obligations of urban life no longer justified its benefits. Migration then becomes both a cause and a consequence of decline. Cahokia had grown partly because people moved toward it. Once its attraction weakened, the same mobility worked in reverse. Residents possessed relatives, trade partners, and cultural connections across a vast region. Leaving did not necessarily mean entering an unknown wilderness. A family could move toward allied communities or return to an ancestral homeland. Every departure made the city harder to maintain. Fewer farmers produced food. Fewer labourers repaired mounds and walls. Smaller gatherings reduced the prestige of ceremonies. Abandoned neighbourhoods made remaining residents more vulnerable and isolated. Population loss therefore became self-reinforcing. The city declined because people left, and more people left because the city was declining. Disease may also have contributed, particularly in crowded districts with contaminated water and poor sanitation. Yet there is no firm evidence for one epidemic severe enough to explain the abandonment. Illness likely acted as a persistent cost rather than a single killer. Repeated infections, childhood stress, and nutritional deficiencies could reduce resilience over generations, especially when food shortages or political disruption occurred. Economic explanations face similar limits. Cahokia benefited from exchange networks carrying copper, shell, stone, and prestige goods, but it was not simply a marketplace whose trade routes collapsed. Most residents depended on local agriculture and resources. Still, if distant alliances weakened, elites lost the rare materials that helped demonstrate authority. The city became less effective as a ceremonial centre connecting many regions, and communities no longer needed to travel there for prestige or legitimacy. Another possibility is that Cahokia's urban experiment had always been difficult to sustain. Its rapid formation brought together migrants, local families, ritual specialists, farmers, and political leaders under a new identity. That identity may have been powerful but shallow. Monumental construction could temporarily conceal divisions that never disappeared. Once expansion slowed, there were fewer opportunities to bind people through new projects, feasts, and victories. No single explanation fully accounts for Cahokia because the city was not a machine with one broken part. It was a living network. Climate affected harvests. Harvests affected political loyalty. Political conflict affected food distribution. Inequality affected willingness to work. Migration affected labour. Religious doubt affected authority. Each problem made the others harder to solve. The most convincing answer may therefore be accumulation rather than catastrophe. Cahokia was abandoned when enough households concluded, for different reasons, that they could build safer, freer, or more dependable lives elsewhere. They did not need to overthrow the city, they only needed to stop sustaining it. Monks Mound remained too large to erase, but power is not stored permanently inside Earth. It exists only while people continue to recognize it. When the crowd stopped gathering and the labour stopped arriving, the monument became a memory of authority rather than authority itself. When Cahokia's great neighbourhoods empty, the story does not end with an abandoned landscape waiting for outsiders to rediscover it. Indigenous people continue living throughout the Mississippi Valley. Communities move, merge, divide, and establish new settlements. Ceremonial traditions change, political centres shift, and memories travel with families who leave the American bottom. Cahokia's urban system disappears, but the people connected to it do not vanish. This distinction matters because the word collapse can create a false image of total extinction. The residents of Cahokia are not swallowed by the earth. They become ancestors within later indigenous histories, although tracing exact lines of descent remains difficult. Many native nations maintain cultural, historical, or spiritual connections to the broader Mississippian world, including peoples whose ancestors lived across the central and southeastern United States. Archaeology can identify patterns of movement and continuity, but it cannot assign Cahokia to one modern nation with complete certainty. The city existed centuries before sustained European colonization transformed the region. By the time French missionaries, traders, and settlers entered the Mississippi Valley, Cahokia's central mounds were already ancient. Local indigenous communities knew the landscape, yet European observers often treated the earthworks as puzzles, disconnected from living native peoples. Some settlers found it difficult to believe that indigenous societies had built large cities or organized monumental labor. That disbelief later hardened into the myth of a vanished mound builder race. During the 18th and 19th centuries, writers proposed that North America's earthworks had been constructed by Phoenicians, Egyptians, Vikings, Israelites, Hindus, or some imagined lost civilization. The theories differed, but they shared an assumption Native Americans could not have created monuments of such scale. The myth served a political purpose. If the mounds belonged to a mysterious people destroyed before European arrival, settlers could portray the land as already emptied of its rightful owners. Indigenous displacement then appeared less like conquest and more like the occupation of an abandoned continent. Archaeology was used not only to misunderstand the past, but also to justify the seizure of the present. Evidence eventually made the truth unavoidable. Similar mound-building traditions existed across long periods of indigenous history. Artifacts found within the earthworks matched native technologies and cultural patterns. Burials, houses, pottery, food remains, and construction methods all demonstrated that the mounds had been built by the ancestors of indigenous peoples. No lost European or Near Eastern population was required. The mystery survived largely because some observers preferred an exotic fantasy to the reality of native achievement. Cahokia itself suffered heavily during this period of denial. The land was divided into farms, roads, industrial areas, and residential developments. Ploughs flattened smaller earthworks. Soil was removed for construction. Railways and highways cut through archaeological deposits. Houses and businesses were built over former neighbourhoods. Some mounds disappeared so completely that only old maps, excavations, or subtle changes in elevation reveal where they once stood. Across the Mississippi near present-day St. Louis, a related mound complex suffered even greater destruction. 19th century observers once described numerous earthworks there, including a large monument known as Big Mound. Expanding streets and buildings gradually consumed them. Big Mound was levelled in the 1860s, its soil carted away for development. Human remains and artefacts were exposed during the destruction, but preservation lost to urban expansion. The damage offers a strange echo of Cahokia's original construction. Ancient workers carried soil basket by basket to raise sacred monuments. Centuries later, modern labourers removed the same earth load by load, treating it as fill. A landscape once organised around memory and ceremony was dismantled because its meaning had been forgotten or ignored. Interest in Cahokia grew during the 19th and 20th centuries, but early excavation methods sometimes caused additional harm. Archaeologists cut trenches through mounds, removed burials, and interpreted discoveries through assumptions now recognised as incomplete. Indigenous perspectives were often excluded. Human remains and sacred objects entered museums without the consent of descendant communities. Modern archaeology has become more careful, though difficult questions remain. Researchers use remote sensing, soil chemistry, botanical analysis, isotope studies, and detailed mapping to investigate the city with less destruction. They can identify buried houses, plazas, palisade lines, workshops, and ancient surfaces without excavating every feature. Old collections are re-examined, sometimes overturning interpretations accepted for decades. Preservation efforts eventually protected much of Cahokia's central precinct as a state historic site. Monks Mound, the Grand Plaza, reconstructed sections of palisade, and many smaller mounds now survive within managed land. International recognition has emphasized the site's global importance, placing it alongside other great urban and ceremonial centers of the ancient world. Yet preservation remains incomplete. Much of Greater Cahokia once extended beyond the protected boundaries. Roads, subdivisions, agriculture, and commercial development cover areas where ordinary residents lived. The monumental centre receives the most attention because its mounds remain visible, but the majority of Cahokians spent their lives in wooden houses whose traces lie beneath modern landscapes. This imbalance can distort the story. Cahokia was not only Monks Mound, elite burials, and spectacular ceremonies, it was also cooking smoke in crowded courtyards, farmers walking toward distant fields, children carrying water, immigrants preserving memories of other homelands, and families repairing walls before winter. The city's greatness rested on people whose lives rarely produced objects considered worthy of museums. Indigenous participation is increasingly important in interpreting this past. Native scholars, artists, cultural representatives, and community members challenge the idea that Cahokia is a dead civilization available only for scientific study. The site contains ancestors, burials, sacred landscapes, and histories that remain connected to living peoples. Archaeological knowledge does not replace those relationships. Cahokia also challenges the old description of pre-Columbian North America as a nearly empty wilderness occupied only by small, scattered groups. Before major European cities existed in much of northern Europe's colonial world, Cahokia contained monumental architecture, dense neighbourhoods, long-distance networks, political hierarchy, specialised ceremonies, and public works requiring extraordinary coordination. Its existence does not mean every indigenous society was urban or organised in the same way. It proves that the continent contained many forms of social life, including cities. There is no need to exaggerate Cahokia into an empire identical to Rome, or compare every mound with an Egyptian pyramid. Such comparisons can make the site seem important only when it resembles civilizations already familiar to outsiders. Cahokia matters on its own terms. It represents a distinct indigenous experiment in concentration, sacred authority, migration, agriculture, and monumental landscape design. Its mysteries remain. Scholars still debate how its leaders governed, which languages echoed across its plazas, why human sacrifices occurred, and how memories of the city survived among later communities. No single explanation fully accounts for its rapid rise or long decline. The uncertainty does not reduce Cahokia's importance. It reminds us that the archaeological record preserves structures more easily than the intentions, and bodies more easily than voices. The city beside the Mississippi was built from earth, timber, food, belief, and human movement. Its people transformed a floodplain into the center of a world, then gradually carried that world elsewhere. What survives is neither an empty ruin nor a solved mystery. It is a landscape where ancient achievement, colonial erasure, scientific discovery, and living indigenous memory continue to meet. The evening light now settles over the American bottom, softening the terraces of Monks Mound and stretching shadows across the grass where houses once stood. Traffic moves beyond the protected site. Aircraft pass overhead. The Mississippi continues beyond the trees, following channels that are not exactly those known to Cahokia's builders. From the summit, the modern landscape appears quiet. It is difficult to imagine the thousands of cooking fires, the crowded paths, the ceremonies at dawn, and the sound of workers carrying earth toward rising monuments. Nothing remains of their voices. The wooden city has returned almost entirely to the soil. Yet the mound beneath the observer is composed of human decisions. Every layer was gathered from somewhere else. Every basket was lifted by a person who understood that the work mattered. The monument preserves no single name, but it contains the labor of generations. Civilizations rarely disappear as completely as their ruins suggest. Their populations scatter, their ideas change shape, their sacred symbols enter new traditions, their descendants survive wars, migrations, epidemics, and attempts at erasure. The center may fall silent while fragments of its world continue moving through time. Cahokia reminds us that permanence is often something people create because they know life is temporary. Houses decay, rivers shift, leaders die, and cities lose the power to hold their inhabitants. Earth seems more durable, so people raise it toward the sky. But even a mound requires memory. Without those willing to understand it, a monument can become an unexplained hill beside a road. For centuries, Cahokia was hidden not because it lay underground, but because many people refused to recognize what stood before them. The city contradicted a comforting story about an empty continent and a people without complex history. Its rediscovery was therefore not the discovery of something truly lost. It was the slow correction of a failure to see. The floodplain is quiet again. Grass moves where crowds once gathered, and the last light touches the summit of the largest mound. Somewhere beyond it, the Mississippi continues its ancient passage southward, carrying water past fields, towns, and forgotten shorelines. The river remembers no empire forever. The earth keeps only fragments, and above the buried houses of Cahokia, the evening settles gently over the remains of a city that was never truly gone.